and welcome to New Jersey Politics with Laura Jones. I am Laura Jones, and we are so glad to have you here. Today, we're going to be taking a look at legislation impacting many aspects of life, from the way some people wear their hair to protecting drivers in New Jersey. Car thefts continue to be a growing problem. Lawmakers in Trenton are taking notice and taking action. Assemblywoman Vicki Flynn is standing by to discuss that. First up, though, we are taking a moment to remember a longtime state senator, Ron Rice of Newark, who recently passed away. He is the state's longest-serving black senator, who will be remembered as a voice for those who had no voice. So, let's get to it. Congresswoman Bonnie Watson Coleman is a Democrat from the 12th Congressional District, and before her time in Washington, D.C., the Congresswoman spent many years in Trenton in the state legislature. We welcome her to the show.
It's good to see you too. Thank you for having me today.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. Well, first I want to get to some sad news. State Senator Ron Rice recently passed away. A longtime member of the legislature, represented Newark for decades, called a fierce Democrat, also the longest serving African American in the legislature, passed away. So I just wanted to get your take on the type of public servant Ron Rice was and your interactions with him.
First of all, let me just say that I loved and respected him tremendously. When I was in the legislature, he worked us very hard. He was the chairman of the Black Caucus. He would go through the budget once a year, line by line by line, and he would then do a press release on the budget and make us stand there with him as he was reading it line by line by line, his concerns, the things that he was okay with. And we'd go, oh God, we've got to stand here for hours. But that was who he was. He was a person who was in the weeds. He knew what he was talking about. B, he had core values that under no circumstances were you going to take him away from those core values. And C, politics was important to him. He understood it, but he was willing to stand up against even his own party if he thought the party was going in the wrong direction. So I used to refer to him as the North Star when it comes to just social justice, community justice, justice for people who are underrepresented, and someone under any circumstances you could say, oh no, he's not going to go for that. He doesn't believe in that, and he is not going to support that. So, take that someplace else. We didn't always agree on every issue, but we had tremendous respect for one another, that we believed what we were doing was the sort of the right thing to do. And I had the wonderful opportunity to attend a beautifully attended celebration of him months ago, and I got to tell him what I thought about him. Tremendous respect. He was so good for New Jersey. He was so good for new legislators. He was so good for the older legislators. He was good for white legislators. He was good for black. He was just good for New Jersey, and he will be tremendously missed. I am saddened to see that he's passed.
Well, I mean, you mentioned some of his press conferences that went on. I know I covered a lot of those, and he always made himself available. And like you said, a fierce advocate for what he believed in, even if it meant doing something that wasn't popular. In reading some of the articles when they were talking about the legalization of marijuana, most Democrats said, yes, we support this. He said, no, I don't think this is right for the constituents who I represent, and he didn't waver.
No.
Yeah.
And he brought that argument all the way down to Washington and had a meeting with the members of the New Jersey delegation to talk about his position. But that's who he was. And, you're right, he was fearless. If he believed in something, he was willing to go with it, be damned what might happen as a result of it. Sometimes the party tried not to cooperate with him. Sometimes his allies tried not to cooperate with him. But he prevailed. And one of the reasons he prevailed is because he had a close relationship with the constituents in his district. They believed in him, they trusted him, Laura, and they supported him even when he didn't get the support that you expected him to get from the party infrastructure.
Right. I mean, and he spent more than 3 decades. I mean, and you have to run and win. So there were plenty of times that the people didn't like what he was doing, that he could have been voted out, but he wasn't. He maintained
Yeah.
that support. So can you talk a little bit about that legacy?
Well, he was there long enough to have an impact on several generations of legislators. And the young legislators or the newer legislators that are leading in the caucus and leading in the Democratic caucus had the benefit of his tutelage and his accountability measures. And so I think that he's instilled in folks some really important issues of honesty, authenticity, do your work, do it hard, get in the weeds, understand the implications of things for your constituents. I think that he's done that so much with the legislators that are there today that they will have a lot to be able to share with the next generation that comes in. And that's what we want. We want the good to be shared, and we want the don't do this to be shared, so that our representatives are stronger, more grounded, more confident, and more capable and effective in their respective districts.
Yeah. So not
That
only,
doesn't go
yeah,
away, and
yeah.
I know that from a personal perspective, because when I was in the legislature and my dad was no longer there. I still had John Watson stories.
Yeah.
In
Yeah.
fact, I have some even to this day.
Oh,
So those who serve to be public servants and to treat
yeah.
that blessing for what it is, they're always going to be remembered. And anybody that's encountered them either personally or, on one of the platforms in the media, they're going to be touched and they're going to remember something about that person.
I mean, I just got chills when you were talking about him telling you stories about your own father. And that's the thing, is Senator Rice wasn't just a legislator, he was a mentor to younger people who were just getting into a life of public public
Yeah.
service too. Yeah.
He referred to all of the Black women in the caucus as his Nubian queens.
Oh,
And it reminded us that here's this wonderful human being that thinks we're of royalty,
yeah.
that thinks we're special, and expects us to operate in that space in that way. That really was very affirming
Yeah.
as a Black woman.
You mentioned how he made you feel like royalty. Going to kind of transition into another topic. The last time you came on the show, we talked about the Crown Act. And no, we're not talking about The Crown on Netflix. We're actually talking about the Crown Act, a specific piece of legislation that's aimed at preventing discrimination against women or against people with certain haircuts, certain hairstyles, particularly women and men of color. So can you talk a little bit about the Crown Act? Why do we need legislation to protect people from wanting to express themselves through whatever hairstyle they choose?
Thank you. So the Crown Act basically amends the law, the laws preventing discrimination in employment, in housing, and even accommodations on the federal level against people, men, women, children, boys, girls, simply because of the way they wear their hair. That their hair grows out and it's kinky and it's natural, or that they wear it in styles, bantu knots or locks or things of that nature that typify a certain culture coming from the motherland. It prohibits discrimination in those situations when people are seeking jobs, people are seeking housing or public accommodations, or the sports venues that you see that the schools have sponsored or the regions that have sponsored. You saw that sad video of the young wrestler from New Jersey.
Yeah.
A referee decided that his locks were too long and made him cut them right there in front of the gymnasium, in front of everybody there, if he wanted to continue in his match. And so he handled it. Talk about royalty. He handled it royally, and he made me very, very proud. And then he went on to win his match, and that referee was suspended,
Yeah.
as he should be.
And that's traumatic. It's humiliating, it's traumatic, and some people will say, well, maybe it's an issue of safety, but that really isn't. It really wasn't an issue of safety.
No, and it's not an issue of safety. I don't care what profession you're in, because if you have long, silky blonde hair and you're a firefighter, you've got to contain it. If you have black kind of kinky hair in braids and whatnot, you've got to put it in such a way that it doesn't get in the way of your helmet. If you're a pilot, if you're anything, you wear your hair appropriately, the style appropriately for the work that you're doing. It has nothing to do with its texture.
Yeah.
But that was just another illustration of the way people decided whether or not you were worthy of a job, worthy of housing, worthy of coming into their public accommodations. Is a vestige of discrimination. Now, New Jersey has handled it, and some other states have handled it, and some other cities across the nation have dealt with this and put laws into effect that will protect people in those situations. But you need a national law. No matter where you go and apply for a job, go to school, or even want to engage in a sports activity or public accommodations. In this country, you should not be discriminated against because you wear your hair in a certain way that offends people simply because it harkens to another culture.
And what do you think
That's
what do you think it does when I was scrolling through TikTok and one person I see that does comedy, she did something, she was so excited that she saw a woman of color who had her natural hair texture. She did a whole TikTok on it and she was so excited. What do you think the message is when people are allowed to wear their hair as they want to without fear of losing a job or being judged? What message do you think this is sending to the younger people?
that you can be your authentic self and not have to hide and be something that somebody else determines that you need to be for artificial reasons. And I think one of the things that impressed me so much was when Michelle Obama
Yeah.
went back to the White House in her braids.
Yeah.
Now, what are you going to say about Michelle Obama that you don't already know? It made no difference if she had the braids or if she had straightened hair or whatever. She was still brilliant, accomplished, and she was a Black woman who made us very proud and beautiful.
Yeah.
And so I really applaud her for having done that, for going to the White House for a special occasion with her hair in braids.
Yeah.
But this is ridiculous in 2023 that we need to be addressing this or any other type of discrimination. This is an opportunity for us to heal and grow. And passing the Crown Act, which has passed the House two times at least, it's being reintroduced. It'll be reintroduced until we pass it and the president gets to sign it.
Right. So it's passed in the House. It hasn't passed in the Senate, but you have a lot of support in the Senate. Cory Booker, our
Yeah.
U.S. Senator, he's behind it.
The House of Representatives now is under Republican control, even though slight control. And they're just interested in other messaging things and tearing apart investigations and investigating investigators that investigated the investigations that are still going on,
Right.
and
Yeah.
on and on and on and on. And they're not really interested in solving problems
Right.
and working for the people.
Yeah.
And so I'm really glad that, this is not a political program, but I'm a Democrat because I believe that Democrats are fighting for people over politics and that we're got a hell of a battle ahead of us in the next year and a half.
Well, the people you represent are very lucky to have somebody who is a fierce advocate, and we thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us, to talk a little bit about Senator Ron Rice and also about the Crown Act. We'd love to have you back on to talk more issues, but we're running out of time, so we'll just leave it at that. I keep
Thank
calling
you,
you
Laura.
Assemblywoman, Congresswoman Bonnie Watson Coleman. Thank you so much.
It is good to see you. Take
You
care.
too.
Thank
You
you.
too. Car thefts are a growing problem in the Garden State, and state lawmakers are looking for new ways to address the issue. Joining me now is one such lawmaker, Republican Assemblywoman Vicki Flynn, who represents the 13th Legislative District, which takes in parts of Monmouth County. Assemblywoman, thank you so much for joining us.
It's great to be here.
I was at the State House in Trenton for the governor's budget address, and of course everybody's talking about, the spending plan. But what I kept hearing again and again from both sides of the aisle are the issues of car theft. So why is it such a big problem in New Jersey right now?
Well, about earlier last year when I first got sworn in, a bunch of police chiefs reached out to me sometimes they would see me shopping in the local stores, and they alerted me to the fact that car thefts were really on the rise. It seems that there is an organized ring throughout the state of New Jersey in which they target juveniles to go and travel through some of the more affluent neighborhoods in the state that are located near highways, and find cars that maybe people left their car fobs in their cars, and they can notice that, and they just easily take their cars out of their driveways or out of their garages and take them out to the port, and they're shipping them over to Europe. So that was made clear to me quite early on in my term, and I immediately worked with law enforcement to draft some legislation to address this issue.
It sounds like it's not just an issue of stealing people's cars, it's an issue of criminals targeting young people and making them part
Yes.
of their enterprise, so to speak.
Correct. It's a multifaceted issue, and I'm sure that the criminals knew with all the bail reform measures, this was an easy way to make a quick buck. And also think about the fact that all these kids were not in school during this period of time when all this planning was going on. A lot of these teenagers were not going to school on a daily basis due to the pandemic, and so they were an easy target. And it's really because if they are picked up stealing a car, they're just released to a guardian, an adult, very easily from a police station. They're not held, they're not seen by a judge, and some of the legislation I propose changes that.
So, can you talk a little bit about the legislation that you are proposing to address this?
So first, dealing with the juveniles and targeting them, I have specific legislation that I have drafted that says that they should be seen by a judge within 24 to 48 hours, as well as be placed on home arrest so that there's a way to track them. And I would say using an ankle monitor would be the best way, because all law enforcement has told me that they will pick up some of these kids one day and you'll see them probably a week or so later, if not the next day. So we kind of want to get them off this path of criminal activity, and the way we could do that is if we're tracking them better.
Yeah.
So that was one piece of the legislation that I proposed that really deals with the issue we see among juveniles.
Yeah, and that's got to be a very difficult cycle to break, because some people, depending on where you live, you can't escape it, or your parents may be involved in it, or your guardian may be involved in it. So even if a kid may not want to be doing this, there could be powers way more powerful than them that are forcing them. How are they being protected?
And that's why I wanted to break that cycle, because it was pretty clear that's what's happening. You would hear from the local cops that someone comes in and just signs them out. It's not necessarily the parent. It could be the person who is running this organized ring, and it could be the cousin or some uncle, some other relative. So we are hearing that, and we need to address that, because we really are not setting up these kids for success by allowing this to continue under our noses. And that's what we're doing right now without addressing it.
So can you talk a little bit about what other legislation or other portions of the legislation you intend to address, so you actually get to the people who are behind it, the big fish, so to speak?
I've proposed enhanced sentencing for people who are the ringleaders. If they are caught using juveniles, which they have been many times, they should be held without bail, and they should be prosecuted and be subject to enhanced penalties. I've also proposed legislation that says that if you are a repeat offender, meaning arrest, not convictions, arrest, that you would lose your ability to get bail. Because under the recent catch and release policies that came with the Criminal Reform Act, a lot of these people who are picked up engaging in car thefts, they're not held. So there's no ability to address it. They just are re-released and doing it again the next day.
Well, can you talk a little bit about your constituents, those people whose cars are being stolen? What are you hearing?
They are flipping mad, I guess is the best way to say that. There's been a lot of different social media sites that have been generated and created in my district. It seems throughout last year, through the spring, through the summer and early fall, there was like a car theft, if not multiple car thefts a day. People were posting their Ring cameras, videos, and kind of alerting their neighbors through social media that this was happening, a group text. So they were contacting me, my office, my staff's office, as well as Assemblyman Scharfenberger's office on an almost daily basis. We would see this happening. It even happened to the governor's neighbor.
Right.
But for the fact that, his neighbors this neighbor's neighbors contacted the police and alerted them to the potential car theft, because that was the issue in our district. The problem we're seeing now, after all the warnings to bring your car fobs inside and leave them in somewhere safely, well, the car thefts then were no more. It was more home invasions plus car thefts, and that's what was really frightening to our constituents in District 13.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. So, what about your colleagues in the legislature? How have they been reacting? Because crime doesn't know a zip code, crime doesn't care what party you're affiliated with. So, how have your colleagues been as far as working on potential solutions?
I think my colleagues have been working with me. My legislation I proposed, like I said, early in 2022. And like I said, the car thefts really rose throughout the different pockets of the state throughout the spring, the summer, and the fall. And in the fall, I think everyone got the message enough was enough. So my Democratic colleagues started proposing legislation, put my name on it as well, and we're working together to try to get this legislation through and up for approval. So there seems to be a push, bipartisan push, but I think my constituents believe it's taking way too long to get done.
Well, what about those in law enforcement? How has that relationship and how is that relationship right now? And what are some of the things they're telling you? Their perhaps frustrations or perhaps things that are working or they'd like to see done, because they're the ones on the front lines responding to these calls.
Correct. The state PBA totally supports what I'm doing. They've appeared in committee hearings and pleaded with the legislators to go ahead and adopt this legislation immediately and fast track it. There's so many issues associated with, for instance, recruiting people to enter law enforcement. We're seeing very poor trends as it relates to the public safety needs of our state going forward. And this is one of the reasons. If we can't address something that's right in front of us, that's a real problem in a quick manner, why would anyone want to run in and try to deal with this issue? The law enforcement community feels they're not being protected. And as a member of the legislature, I don't like them feeling that way. They're very supportive of my bills, and I will continue fighting with them, as I did at the last voting session. I stood up during the voting session and asked that one of my bills be presented for a vote. And unfortunately, it was tabled by the majority party.
We've talked to people in law enforcement, sheriff, and a lot of times they go back to bail reform being at the core issue, that there has to be reform at that level. So what can you say to that?
I agree with them. It's not saying we're going to throw out all the efforts made with bail reform with the Criminal Reform Act. That's not what law enforcement's saying. That's not what I'm saying. But in this particular area in which we need to address an issue that deals with crime throughout our state, that also is going to deal with rising auto insurance costs. Let's not forget that. That's not baked into the numbers yet with the insurance quote you're getting year to year, but it's coming because the insurance companies have had to pay a boatload of money on these claims. In order for us to get ahead of that, we have to address this issue. And we can do it in a really surgical way, in the ways that I've proposed, in which some of my colleagues in the legislature are willing to consider. But bail reform seems to be the tricky part. But I think we're going to get it done.
That is an interesting point that I haven't heard a lot of people talking about, is the insurance, the impact on insurance. And New Jersey is already one of the most expensive states it is to drive. And I myself wasn't necessarily thinking about that layer. And we haven't really seen that financial portion of it drip down to the general public. But you think that's next?
Yes, I've talked to the insurance industry, and they said those numbers are to come in the next 3 to 5 years. We'll start seeing the impact of all these cars being stolen, home invasions, and related damages. Those damage claims have not been baked into the numbers, but they're going to come. I am on the AFI committee, and we've talked a lot in this year about the rising insurance costs that are coming. This is this is another layer that's coming, and it's making New Jersey yet so much more unaffordable for the people that really need those type of need us to do better to make it more affordable for them so that they stay here.
Yep. So as we wrap up our time here, what are the next steps as you look to move this legislation forward? What can we look for next?
Well, we're in committee on this on Thursday. 4 of my bills are to be considered. I'm hoping they get through, and then they're up for a vote. I understand the Senate has similar versions that have been should be up for a vote this week as well. So I'm hoping we get to the governor's desk sometime this spring. Fingers crossed. Because I think this is something I know my constituents want, constituents throughout the state want, and we also want to make sure that we're supporting our law enforcement in allowing them to do their job and keep our neighborhoods safe.
And there really are so many victims in this. It's not just a car that's being stolen and then replaced. It's young people who are being exploited and used to commit these crimes. So it's not as easy as you first look at it.
It's not easy, but it requires the attention of a crisis so that we don't have this whole generation of kids going down a path we really don't want them going down. And make no mistakes, the criminals know they put this together because of the criminal reform acts that were put in place in bail reform. They found this little area in which they could go in and make some money pretty quickly. And so we need to close that gap. And that's all we're doing with this legislation.
It is a business for sure. And we thank you, Assemblywoman, so much for taking the time to talk to us.
Thank you for putting attention on this.
Absolutely. And that will do it for today. I'm Laura Jones. Thanks so much for watching New Jersey Politics. We look forward to seeing you back here next time.